Bienvenidos, Ushamdid, and welcome Anne Arundel Community College learners from the Spring 2023 semester taking the CTS-233 Section 400 Network Programmability course. This is the Cisco Networking Academy's DEVASC 200-901 Certification Exam Preparation course, and in this video tutorial, we're going to be wrapping up Lab 627, and we've got some heavy lifting here and some very cool stuff that's going to be taking place. So we're going to be looking at part number 5 and number 6 of Lab 627. So let's go ahead and dive in. And we're actually going to pick up right where we left off. So part 5 of Lab 627 starts out with us creating a bash script. And I'm going to show you what that script would look like for the testing that we just did with Nginx, right? So I created this script called nginx-app.sh. And so we want to take a look at a simple example. And the reason we're creating the bash script is to create the Dockerfile. Initially, I created the Dockerfile by hand. We went ahead and I went into VI and I typed in the commands that I needed. Now, in larger instances, or I should say where you've got more commands that are happening, you may not just go into the Dockerfile. If you want to sort of replicate things or be able to come back in here later on, and instead of having to type all of this in just to add in maybe an about.html page, you just have to come into your bash script and put one line in here, and then we can rerun this command and it will rebuild our Dockerfile every single time. And the reason I say it's going to rebuild it is because you can see right here, the very first line of this bash shell script is redirecting and will overwrite, if it is there, because it's a single greater than sign, the Docker file. And I'm going to show you an example of that. So if I run this right now, let's go ahead and say /nginx-app.sh. And the reason I can do the / on this is because the execute bit is set. So when you create your shell script, you would use change mode, or I always say chmod, u+x, and then the name of your script. Right? And now you can say / the name of the script. So let's look at our Docker file. So what did we actually create when we ran that? Well, there it is, right? And you can see I added that new line in there, maintainer. And again, it's just so we can see something different, some additional information that we could put in there. So now let me pull up my nginx-app script, because maybe I used my Docker file and hey, that was great, but you know what? And it worked. So now I'm ready to extend the functionality. So now I want to create an about HTML file. And I want to have that here in this user share nginx HTML directory, because maybe off of the index.html page that I have, it has a href link to get to about.html. And so I would save this file, my bash script, and let's clear the screen here. So we say more on the Nginx bash script. That's what it looks like. And I'm going to copy the index.html because this may have some issues if that file is not there. And we'll just call it about.html, right? There we go. So what does the Docker file look like? So we could say more Docker file, and there you go. You can see the second copy line is not there. So what are we going to do to get that there? To basically recreate my Docker file so that I can recreate my container so that it will have the functionality where the index.html page, let's say, has an href link to the about.html page, because I'm incrementally building a web server out here to use at some point. So let's run it, /nginx-app.sh. Let's clear the screen. Let's cat that Docker file out. And there you have it. And so here's where that bash script is going to add some value. So now let's take a look at this in the context of the lab. Part 5 of Lab 627, and I'm in that sample-app directory, and you can see the sample-app.sh bash script is there. So let's look at it, and actually let's just cat that out. Oops, .sh, can't get the H in there. So there we go. So here are all the commands that they want you to put in there, right? And so this is I've tested this already many times, and so this is exactly what they're looking for you to have in there. So you can see right here, what is this bash script going to do? It's going to make a directory called tempdir, right? In the directory that we're currently in, which is the sample-app directory. And then under the tempdir directory, it's going to create a directory called templates. And then it's going to do the same thing and create a directory called static. And so what are we doing? We're just duplicating the file system structure that we have right here with static, and the static has my CSS file, and then my style.css file, and then the templates has my index.html file. And so we're just creating another directory called tempdir, and in that directory, we're going to duplicate what we currently have right here, because we need to use those files when we go to build our Docker container. And then what do we do after we create those directories? We copy our Python script for sample_app that starts the Flask image up, and we're going to put that into the temp directory. And then we're going to copy recursively, that's the -r, meaning whatever's in the templates directory and any subdirectories that might be in there, we're copying everything out of templates and we're putting into the tempdir templates directory. And then I'm recursively copying everything out of the static directory, the style.css file, and any other files that might be in there, and we're putting into our tempdir static. So these 6 commands are doing nothing more than taking all the files that we were working with in part 4 of this lab and copying them and making a duplicate set in this temp directory, tempdir. That's it. And now we create the Dockerfile. So here's the creation of our Dockerfile. Where's the Dockerfile being created? In tempdir. So that at the end of the day, if I wanted to come in here and make a change, right, and maybe we put the maintainer line in here from the Nginx Dockerfile, maybe we do that, and we want to add some functionality or add that line to it. All I need to do is remove the tempdir, right? That's going to get created here in just a second, and then come in and put the new line in here and then rerun my bash script. And take a look. So from Python, so we're pulling down a Python image. We're going to run pip install flask and install pip on that Python image. We're going to copy the static and template files. So in other words, we're going to copy the index.html. We're going to copy the style.css, right? We're going to copy those things over that's ultimately what the Dockerfile is doing, but these commands are just echoing out what goes in the Dockerfile. So in that Dockerfile, we're going to copy what's in static. We're going to copy what's in templates, and we're going to put it into the home my app. We're going to copy the Python app. We're going to put that into the home my app directory. We're going to expose port 8080, and I think I get this backwards all the time. So 8080 is the port that we're going to expose on the container, and then we're going to have that Docker run command with a -p, where we're going to expose it on 8080 as well to the host. And then we've got this command that gets run, which is run that Python script that creates the Flask instance object that's going to be our web server. And that's pretty much it, right? So that's all the lines that you have in here that are part of the Docker container, right? So what do we want to do first though, right? So, and this shows you, these steps, and then it says build the Docker container, right? So if I was to try to go into tempdir, you'll notice you can't, because we haven't run the bash shell script yet. We need to run that bash shell script. So let's do that. I'm going to go ahead. You could say, chmod u plus x on sample-app.sh, and then I can simply say sample-app.sh. I hit enter. We don't see anything. That's a good sign with the bash shell script, right? Because that means, did it create that tempdir? It did. So now we can cd into tempdir. What's in here? Well, all the things that we told the bash shell script to copy in here and then to create with those echo statements is my Dockerfile. So what's inside my Dockerfile? There you go. From Python, run pip install flask, copy things from the static and templates directory into /home myapp static and home myapp templates, which are the index.html and the CSS, and then copy our sample app, our Python script that's going to create that Flask instance. And then we expose it on port 8080, and I run the command Python 3, and I run that script. And this is what the container is doing. So again, this is the recipe. The Dockerfile is the recipe to build the container cake. So let's go ahead and do that. So docker build -t sample app dot. And all this is doing, we've seen this command before when we use the hello-nginx. We're building a Docker image, -t is like telling, hey, that's the name of it. And the dot says you're looking for the Docker file in this directory. I hit enter. We're going to have to download the Python image. Again, 7 steps in there, right? We've got the from, the run, 3 copies, and then the expose and the command. Those are the 7 steps. Again, this takes just a quick second here, and then we're going to kick off or run the Docker image once this is done. And you can see the Python is requiring us to download a little bit more than we did with just the nginx web server. Because again, this is my app, but still lighter weight than if I was to build a bare metal server or to have to build an entire VM. All right, and so we see some warnings there, and this is about the new release of pip, and okay, that's great. We don't need that. So you can ignore those notices that you're getting right there. And again, all 7 steps completed. So now let's go ahead and kick off the run command here. So we're going to say docker run. Now we're going to see some new options because last time the only option we saw was -p in the supplement. Well, here we've got the -t. And what that says is I want to create a terminal so that I could jump onto the command or access it from the command line, right? And we can do that with docker exec, and I'll show you how that's going to be done. So that's our -t. The -d says, run it in the background, right? So indicates we want to run the container in the background so it doesn't seize control of the terminal like our nginx supplement did. And then we've got our -p, and I always get these mixed up. And in fact, I think in the sample tutorial, I may have gotten them mixed up as well. So we say 8080. So the first 8080 is the reference to the port that the app is running in the Docker container, right? So sample app. And then the second value is the port on the host. And I think I may have said that backwards possibly when I did the supplement, right? So the first 8080 references the port that's running on the Docker container sample app, right? The second 8080 tells Docker to use this port on the host machine, right? Which is my DEVASC virtual machine. And then we're going to use this -- name. And you might be saying, well, wait a second, where are you getting the name sample app? Well, here's where we're getting it from. And this is interesting. So I'm going to say sample running sample app. So what did I just do right there? Because last time I just said hello-nginx. Well, the hello-nginx is just simply the name of the container, right, that we were running. So here what we're saying is I want an instance of this container running as sample running, but the name here has to be the same name as the container, right? So the name of the container is sample app, right? But we're creating an instance of it called sample running. And that's what this -- name allows us to do, right? So specifies what you want to call the instance of the container. It's going to be sample running. And then the container image name is sample app. And so that's what we're doing here. So again, a little bit more complicated than what we did before, but it's still okay. So now we're going to say docker ps-a, and there it is. And you can see here is my container ID. Let's copy that because we know we're probably going to need that later. And this is telling you that, hey, everything is up and running. So it's interesting because step 6 of part 5 tells you, okay, save your bash script. And then part 6 of the lab is about running the bash script. But we wanted to do these things first, right, to stay in line with what we had on part 5. So again, part 6 is, okay, run the bash script. They didn't do the chmod command, but that's okay. And then it says investigate things, right? So it said to list out what's in the temp directory now. So you can see I'm already in the temp directory here. We can see what's in that temp directory. We saw the Docker file. And so it wants us to do this docker ps-a and put this in running.txt. And so all we're doing there is we're taking the docker ps-a command, we're taking the output from that command, and we're appending it to this running.txt text file. So if I was to cat out running.txt, it's just simply the output from docker ps-a, because maybe we're going to be referencing that later on. So now they want us to run a real quick, before we go to the web browser, let's do a quick curl request and see if I go to http, //172 8080.17.0.1. Now you might be wondering, colon 8080, you might be wondering, how do you know that that's the address? Well, the lab knows that for the virtual machine and for what Docker, the Docker interface on the VM is going to do, is it's going to be that 172.17.0.1. Now you also might be wondering, well, wait, how did that get hard coded in there? Well, remember, our Python script, in order to get that value, was using the request method that's part of the Flask class. And so that's how we were getting that value. If I come back up here to sample app and we take a look at more sample underscore app.py, remember, this is the Python script that we created when we render the index.html. And there it is right there. You are calling me from this. Sorry, that was commented out. I apologize. That was commented out in that file. And did we use another? Oh, I'm sorry, the index.html. So my bad. We got to go to the index.html, which is where, and that is in the templates, cd templates. And there we go. Index.html. But again, it is using that request method to get that remote address, and it's here. So I apologize about that. Not in the Python file. It's in the index.html, which the Python file references. And so this is the text that we would expect to see. And so when we run that curl command, pull it back up here, that is what the index.html is going to show, right? And that's a default for Docker, right? And so again, to take a step back here, this 172.17.0.0/16 subnet is by default what Docker is using. If we were to say IP address, and this is how the lab knew that that would be the file or the IP, there it is. And there's this Docker interface, and that is my IP address. And in fact, maybe we could trim this down a little. Well, we'll get a whole bunch of internet interfaces, so we'll just leave it the way it is there. But that IP address command is going to show you that Docker interface. And so we are good to go. So now it says access and explore the running container. Now this is where the Docker exec comes in, and this is inextricably linked to that -t command that we had used earlier. And so how can I jump on to the CLI for the container? Well, we say docker exec -it, and I'm going to say sample running, right? Because that was what we named the instance. And I've got to have a typo in here. I'm assuming sampler, or no, sample running. Yeah, I got that spelled right. Oh, sorry. And what do I want to execute? My apologies. /bin/bash. I totally forgot that. So we're going to attach to the virtual machine, and we're going to do it using bash, right? We're executing. What are we executing, right? Docker exec is docker execute in the terminal for sample running, right? Make it interactive, as the I stands for interactive. And then it's the bash shell is what I want to run. So I can come in here and say, all right, what's going on here? Who's logged in? How long has the system been up, right? What current working directory? And I'm doing all of this from inside our Docker container, right? And they want us to see the ls command so you can see all of the file system stuff that's in here. Well, let's go into the home my app directory. Remember, this is where we copied into in the Docker file, we had those echo statements that were going to copy the sample underscore app.py Python script. It was going to duplicate the static directory. What's in the static directory? In my container? Well, there's my style.css file. What's in the templates directory in my container? It's the index.html file, right? So all of those things that we had copied over so that the container would have them, everything it needed in its little hermetically sealed bubble is here. So now it wants us to simply exit out of here, where we just type exit. Now, what it didn't have us do, or at least I didn't see, or actually it might say that at some point, but we want to hit the web, we want to pull the web page up, right? And so here you can see localhost 8080. It says, woot, woot, this is where you're calling me from. Let me refresh that, right? And that's exactly what you would see. And again, to show you that this is not like some static trick I'm doing here. If I did 8081, it's going to not work, right? So I come back up here and we say 8080, and there it is. And so our Python app has been containerized. We've dropped it into a Docker container. So now let's do some cleanup here, right? And let's get out of the templates directory. Let's cd, and actually I'll just stay right here, right? So we're in the sample-app directory, and let's go ahead and do docker stop. Now, again, you can think of the name that we gave the instance, right? And the reason we gave it an instance name is here, previously, when I showed you how to do this, we had to go get the Docker ID, right? Or the container ID. And then we would use the container ID. It's a lot easier using this alias here, the instance name for this container instance, which is tied to that container ID. So I could say, and actually before we stop it, let's see what we've got here. Let's make sure Docker PS, right? So it's running. So now let's go ahead and say Docker stop sample running. And that's going to stop this Docker instance, this container. And it looks like the VM is kind of dragging its feet here. Again, a little bit larger type stoppage here as opposed to the Nginx sample that we did. So now let's say Docker PS. All right, it's certainly not running, but is it still here? PS-A will show me the stopped containers. And it is stopped. What we didn't do in the sample is, well, what if I don't want to delete it? What if I just, I want to stop it because I'm not using it, but hey, now I'm going to do some testing. Well, you can say Docker start sample running. Again, an alias, instead of having to use the container ID, we can just simply use that alias name there, sample running. And I could have called it whatever, right? Remember, the important part was the last argument, which was the name of the container sample app, the image name. That had to be whatever the name of the image was, but this is arbitrary, right? And I can create multiple instances with different names of that same image. All right, so we've got the, it's running again. So if I say Docker PS, we can see that it's running. So let's go ahead and stop it with Docker stop. Again, I apologize, it's gonna take a second here. And now we're gonna do the same thing we did previously, which is we're gonna do some cleanup. As soon as this wraps up, again, it'll take a couple seconds. There we go. So Docker PS, it's no longer running. Docker PS-A, it's been stopped. But I'm done working with this. So we're going to say Docker RM sample running. And that is just simply the alias name for that container ID that is built from that Docker image sample app. Okay, Docker PS, it's definitely not going to be there. Docker PS-A, it has been removed. But what about images, right? It's still the image sample app is still here. Now, maybe we want to wipe this out, right? Because maybe we're all done doing our testing with everything. And yeah, you could certainly do that. And how would we do that? Just for completeness here, Docker RMI. I'm going to get rid of sample app. And, oops, sorry. Image name. Did I miss? Oh, I missed. I'm like, wait a second, that should have worked. Sample app. But of course, I've got a typo in there. And maybe I want to get rid of everything that we've got here. I want to get rid of sample app. I want to get rid of the hello Nginx that we were messing with before. And we don't want the tag latest on there. We just need that. And then I could say RMI Python, right? That Python image we downloaded. And then I can get rid of the Nginx image that we had downloaded to build our hello-Nginx container from. So now Docker images, all gone. All right, well, very, very cool stuff here. You guys now know how to build a Python application that will use the Flask web framework, leveraging an index.html and a style.css file, how to roll that into a Docker container, how to start up and run an instance of that Docker container with an alias name that makes it a lot easier to manipulate that image later on. We went to the web page, we saw how we use curl, and then we cleaned everything up. Super cool. Really enjoy Lab 627, one of the best labs in the course by far. All right, well, that is going to do it for this tutorial on Lab 627, and this wraps up Lab 627. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.